Hi, my name is Kirby, and people have asked me if I would put my recipe of sourdough bread on video so that they could see how they can make the sourdough as well. Just to let you know, I started this because I kept seeing how the local grocery store kept raising the prices of their sourdough bread, and I thought, well, let's see if I can do it. Well, the very first thing that you want to do is the night before you get started, and it doesn't have to be, you can leave this out for an entire day, but I keep my sourdough in the refrigerator, and at night I take it out so it starts to warm up. And so last night what I did is I got a bottle and started this whole process. So you take your sourdough, and people say, you know, how much time or how much the ingredients are. So the very first thing, and I weigh everything in grams. It seems like all the recipes are in grams. The very first thing that I do is I'm going to be using about 200 to 250 grams of sourdough. I'm going to put together a total of about 250 grams of flour and water in this. And right here I'm going to get up to about 125, and so right there that's 126, and so I'm going to add about 125, 126 grams of warm water. I'm a little bit over by about 12 grams, so I'm going to add that up, and that'll put me right about there. And then what I do is I simply stir it. Now, one of the things that you warm it up, and in the morning, I'm an early riser, and so when I get up in the morning, what I do before I go hiking or exercise, I add my starter to this. And all I do is I do that, set it aside, and I've found that what you want to do to make your sourdough, you want your starter to be really active, and so this is will sit out for about 3 hours, and it's going to be very active. And I don't know if you can see right here, but the sourdough is very active. So sourdough is ready to go. I'm going to get a large bowl right here, and on your scale you just zero it out. Now what I've done is I've pre-measured. I use 100 grams of peacock flour, and then I use 100 grams, and people say is it bleached or unbleached. I use unbleached. I don't know how bleached would work or not. And then I use 100 grams of whole wheat flour. And the recipe calls for 20 grams of salt. I don't use that much. I use around 14 or 15 grams of salt. And so, and then what I do, and one of the things you want to do, just as a hint, get yourself a large spatula, because you'll find that it's easier to turn your dough, as well as when you're doing it, you don't hit your knuckles as much, easy on the sides. So I've done that, and now what I've done is I use 800 grams of turkey flour, and I'm going to put that in there. And I'm simply, now I'm going to stir this up so that the salt and the peacock and the whole wheat flour get mixed in there. So as you can see, it goes pretty quick. Now the next thing I'm going to do is, the very next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do my starter. I haven't found a way to do it without making a mess or being a little bit messy anyway. So the recipe calls for 200 grams. I found anywhere between 200 and 250. Obviously, the more starter you put in, the more it raises. So I am going to measure that out. That's 135, and that's about 255. So now what I'm going to do is get 700 grams of water. The recipe actually calls for about 800, but I have found that it's the wetter it is, the harder it is to work with, and the results are really turn out well. So that gives me about 360, and again, I'm doing 700 grams. And now, one of the things okay, 701. So I'm good there. So the next thing I'm going to do is, I have found several different ways of stirring. As you can see, your starter's resting up here on top. And what I found before I do really aggressive stirring is I'm just going to have the water and the starter and the top of the flour to begin to mix together itself. I found that this actually gives a better reaction to when you start working with your flour and starter. So as you can see right here, it's the top of it's pretty well mixed together. And now what I'm going to do, and this is again why you can see why you want a nice sturdy spatula, is that you're going to stir it around. And as you know, one of the things that they say is that how you want to turn this is you want to turn it until it's stringy. So what you're trying to do is get a gooey amount of dough and flour mixed together, and so what you're doing is you're gonna as you do that, you're gonna push down and lift up the flour from the bottom, because that's where it's residing. So again, this part works pretty fast. Now let's put this stuff away. What you want to do, and this is what I found, you know, we're going to use what is, I think they pronounce it as a couche, and a couche is a linen cloth that you're going to use later. So again, I used to do this with the couche, and part of the reason I stopped that is that your couche, if you do that, the wet flour and the sourdough or the yeast, not yeast, but starter, clump up on your subsequent turns. And so there I have it on the thing. Now I'm just going to tell you a hint that what I do right now is I am going to immediately put this in water, because this hardens up real fast, and for cleaning purposes and ease of, so you're not making a huge mess later and trying to clean it up. If you just take a minute to clean up your spatula and your pan, because you're going to use your bowl that you use to make this with to begin with, and if you clean it up, then it's right now the cleanup process becomes so much easier than if you were to let this dry and wait, because now you're really trying to scrape off the dough. And I'm going to clean up the little stir right here that I used to make the starter. So this is pretty well clean, and it's unbelievable, not unbelievable, but it's just so much easier if you take just 1 or 2 minutes to clean up what you've done. Now what I'm going to do is, you can see that this dough is here, is pretty stringy. So what I'm going to do is I use a sifter because sometimes the flour gets so what you want to do right now is you want to put some flour on the top, have it sifted, and this is what I found. This is just really easy. What you're going to do is you're just going to push this out. Now this recipe calls to take your dough and fold it over 4 times. So you start off with a full amount, and all I'm going to do is pull it over. Now again, you want to have a good flour surface so it doesn't stick, and I'm going to again put some more flour here just to keep it. I like to, at this point in the process, I like nice and square edges, so I know that when you're putting it together it's going to be easier to work with. So one of the things that you want to do, and the purpose of doing this, from what I can see, is number one is that you're distributing the sourdough starter throughout the entire flour. And so again, we're going to do this 4 times and then fold it over. Again, I'm going to, and I'm just pushing down, so this right here goes really fast. And so now I'm just going to fold it over again. And when you notice that your fingers are starting to stick on this, that's when you want to add some flour to it. Again, I'm spreading it out. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is fold it over from bottom to top, and this part is a little wet here, and that's part of the reason why you don't want to add too much flour to it. And as you can see, it kind of is square. And now the next part is the easy part. Well, just to get ready, I'm going to put a little bit of flour in the bottom of the bowl so that it doesn't stick. I'm going to fold this over 4 times and kind of form kind of a round ball, which will be what we'll be working with later. And that's what our very first part. We'll come back and we're going to do this 3 more times. One of the things that you want to do at this point is you want to cover that with a nice dry cloth and set it over in a warm place in the kitchen. I recommend a nice strong, I'm not sure what you call it, it's a bread separator. I like a nice metal with a nice sharp blade on it, because now what I'm going to do is, as you do this, you'll notice that on your surface, and this is why you don't want to use a couche at this point, you're going to be picking up the wet, starting to dry pieces of flour.